Welcome to the Gray Area Podcast. My name is Kevin Gray. Appreciate you listening today, wherever you get your podcast for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. Today's episode is presented by Aura. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports, and be sure to write a review for the podcast. And you can follow me on also the YouTube channel if you're watching it at Kevin Gray Sports. Like and comment on the video as well. It's Interview Wednesdays. We are in the middle of NFL hot talk, if you will. I would call it, hot stove, but that's Major League Baseball, so that's a different conversation. But anyway, we've got free agency coming up, and of course the Cowboys are going to be front and center with a lot of different things that are going to be happening as we get closer to the new league year. And I decided, I was like, I gotta have a conversation with my guy, because he's going to be reporting on all of this. He's going to be right there in the middle and the heart of it. He covers the Dallas Cowboys for the Dallas Morning News. You can find him on Twitter at Gehlken NFL. He is Michael Gehlken. Michael, what's going on?
I'm a little jealous, Kevin. Thanks for having me. But seeing your intro, the name, the gray area, the gray smoke coming in, like I can't do that with Gehlken. Like there's no pun, there's no visual. It's just I gotta work around it. But thanks for having me.
I appreciate you hanging out. We'll figure one out for you as time goes on. We'll figure out one for you to be able to get you going there. But nothing gets Cowboys fans going like this time of the year, Michael, because we're just coming off of the NFL Combine. Obviously, the NFL Draft is in late April, but a lot to get to before we get there. And before we get into anything specific, 30,000-foot view, meeting with Jerry at the Combine, obviously different things, whether it be Tyron Smith, Tony Pollard, Dak Prescott. We'll get into quite a bit of it as we go on. But what's your overarching viewpoint on where this team is and the direction you feel like they're going in, based off not just what happened last season, but what approach they want to take going into this offseason, going into the 2024 NFL season?
Yeah, I think the key thing is that they need to find a way to break through. 3 straight wins of 12 regular season wins. That's great to have 3 straight years of that. But if you're not having playoff success, and the Cowboys obviously with a 1-3 record over that span have been unable to have postseason success, you ask yourselves as a group, all right, what can we do to get through the point that thus far we've been able to reach? And so I think that's really been where the foundation of this offseason or how it's laid. And from there, it's like, okay, now what can we be able to do? What do we have to work through? What's the headwind that we have financially from a salary cap standpoint? Who are the guys that we most want to bring back? Coaching staff was first and foremost of assembling that. Mike Zimmer being the choice to replace Dan Quinn, and they also lost 2 coaches on that staff that went on to become defensive coordinators elsewhere. Joe Witt Jr. with Washington, and Adam Dirty, their defensive line coach in Seattle. So that's I think kind of where it all comes down to, though, is just how do we find a way to get through the wall that thus far we've been able to break through.
2 words that have set Cowboys Nation ablaze over the last few weeks now, and I'm sure you've probably had enough of the 2 words. And look, you're already shaking your head because you know which 2 words I'm about to say already. That's right. The words "all in" have become a buzz phrase, if you will, for Cowboys Nation. And it seems like, Michael, for folks who love this team, watch this team, even cover this team, there's a little bit of confusion on what exactly that actually means for this team. From what you understand, what do you believe that phrase means for this team relative to where they are right now?
Yeah, it's a buzz phrase, buzzword, buzzsaw. It's and so I think I have a theory as to how the whole thing got started. But I was there at the Senior Bowl when Jerry Jones was asked about, do you guys just say to yourselves, let's go all in, and kind of, in terms of free agency, and just kind of put all the chips in. And Jerry was asked that question, and then he was asked about all in like a second time, and then not until like the third time did he have kind of the soundbite type quip of like, yeah, we're going to be all in ways that we weren't in the past. Something along the lines of if it's going to be different this year. And I think it's very easy to run with that, because I think so many people are asking themselves, all right, what's going to be different? The definition of insanity, I think, is kind of what has become the Cowboys' experience of late. And maybe not just recently, but maybe since the mid-'90s. It feels like there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of pageantry, but when it comes to actually having playoff success, they fall short, and around we go. So to have this sense of something new and this new sense of aggression and all that, I think it kind of struck at a chord where a lot of people were looking for, okay, that's what's going to be the difference this year. That's how they're going to break through. But I just don't think it's based in reality. From what I've been able to ascertain, there wasn't this conversation behind closed doors between members of the front office where someone pounded the table and said, "This year we're going to do things differently. This year we're going to be all in." I've had multiple people tell me that we have been all in, like in terms of their definition of it, and so it's something that the definition varies on who you ask. I think the public and even players, we've heard Micah Parsons react to it. I think they think of something quite naturally when you're with all in. It's very a loaded 2-word phrase to use, but in reality, the conversations that I've had, the Cowboys are very concerned about what their 2025 salary cap looks like. They're very concerned with, typically when you have these big contracts, like the contracts the Cowboys have to get done, Dak Prescott, Micah Parsons, CeeDee Lamb. Micah Parsons stands to be the highest paid defender in NFL history. CeeDee Lamb stands to be the highest paid wide receiver in NFL history. Dak Prescott, now here's where the real question is, does he want to be the highest paid player in NFL history? Because he certainly could be, based on what he's done and based on where the market is, the salary cap and how it's grown. It's quite natural for the next big contract to be the highest paid contract that there is at that position. But is that what he wants? Because if it is what he wants, I mean, how do you make it all work in 2025 salary cap? I know we're talking in the year 2024, but that's the way teams think, is they think about the future. And there's a huge albatross coming, and the Cowboys are very cognizant of that. They're very cognizant of that as they enter free agency. And I think just overall, when you look at just short-term and long-term budgeting, there's a whole lot of reason to believe that the Cowboys are going to be maybe active in free agency in terms of making the number of moves that they make. But if you're looking for these big, $10+ million contracts for external guys, I don't know if how many or if any you'll be seeing next week. I just really get that sense that that's not coming.
And you're leading me exactly where I want to go as far as this conversation is concerned. Before we get there, let's take a quick break and let's hear from today's sponsor of our podcast and our video, and let's hear from Aura. Today's video is brought to you by Aura. Do a Google search on your name and email address to see how much information comes up about you. I was devastated by the amount of information that I could be seeing searching my name and profile, and I knew then I needed to be protected for not just myself, but also for my family. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, health records, your relatives, it's all out there. That's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from hackers who could use this information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Aura also does so much more to protect me and my family from online threats that I can't see. It's really easy to set up, so I don't have to download several different apps to get things like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more. I get everything at one affordable price. You may already have one of these tools already, but not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. Aura is always on, doing the hard work to protect me and my family so I can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. I value my privacy and I value yours. You can go to aura.com/Kevin Gray to start your 2-week free trial. Please see the link in the description. Back here on the Gray Area Podcast. Appreciate you hanging out with us through that quick break there. And again, thank you to our sponsor for today's podcast and video, and that being Aura today with Michael Gehlken of the Dallas Morning News covering the Dallas Cowboys. And before we went to break there, we were talking about the ideas of what we could see in free agency or maybe the lack thereof when it comes to the Cowboys and the moves that they can make. And Michael, I want you to walk with me here because here's the part where I have some confusion here because I look at a team you mentioned earlier has won 36 games over the past 3 years, 12-5 each of the last 3 seasons. They just had a quarterback who literally finished top 2 in the MVP voting. in terms of Dak Prescott, led the NFL in touchdown passes. CeeDee Lamb, a career year at wide receiver, breaking all kinds of Cowboys records. Micah Parsons, one of the best defensive players in the league. For a team that has as much talent as it does, why doesn't it feel like this team would make the kind of commitment, even if it's just for the 1 year, to kind of push all the chips in the middle and quote unquote go for it, or all in, if you will, based on what you're talking about, how they may view the 2025 cap? Why not make that push based on what they have, knowing how close they may feel like they are to actually winning a championship?
And I think that's probably what people want to see is, okay, forget 2025, forget 2026. Let's just, all in, push all the chips on the table and worry about that later. And it doesn't matter if we might lose one of those blue chip players. It just, if it gives us our best opportunity to win in 2024. Look, I'm not the one in the room. I'm not the one making decisions. I'm not one necessarily who's done all the math in terms of exactly what the 2025 looks like and every nuance to it, beyond telling you of, there's dead money push and guys like Dak's contract, DeMarcus, Zach Martin. I mean, the list goes on. Brandon Cooks, even there's a lot of guys whose money has been pushed forward. And so when you kick the can that far down, like I wrote the other day, it kind of kicks back and you have to kind of look it in the eye. And that's where the Cowboys are. So I think they feel a little hamstrung, but yeah, there's probably, certain things that you could do. I think some people might characterize that as reckless cap management, but in theory, but I think that might be what people want to see, because it's just like, okay, let's just have 1 year where we just, let's just let this be the last year of the window and make it one heck of a squeeze through that window, our best effort. And that might be what people want, but I don't know if that's necessarily how teams are wired. But when you do say all in, it's kind of what people think you're about to do, but it's not what's happening.
Because I think Cowboys fans want to see something similar to what the Rams did a few years ago, where they really kind of went all in. And look, they went and got Stafford. They made the moves that they felt like would push them over the top. And they knew, look, at some point, this thing is going to have to flip and turn over. And it did, but they were able to take advantage and win a Super Bowl in it. And I go and use that example because I start with the quarterback. And for a guy that's got a cap number of over $59 million, I've been trying to tell people, Michael, I said, look, I feel like Dak Prescott's got all the leverage here. My man's got a no trade clause. He can't be tagged. Are the Cowboys really prepared to play with him on the final year of his 4-year, $160 million deal, knowing that if they don't extend him, he can walk essentially for free at the end of this upcoming season? And are they prepared to be able to have life without him? I don't know necessarily if they're in position to feel that way. And I feel like Dak Prescott would know the same as well, or believe at least the same. Where are you when it comes to this game, it feels like, between the Cowboys and Dak Prescott, and how this thing eventually works out, if it does at all, for the quarterback?
Yeah, I think it's a dynamic landscape where, on one hand, for every reason that you just mentioned, he is holding the Cowboys over the coals, where he's got the inability for them to tag him. They can't trade him. Like, they really got to negotiate with him. This is the final year of his contract, so it makes a lot of sense not to get too close up to when he would become a free agent. And if he was to become a free agent next year, all of the so it's kind of hard to explain, but every time the Cowboys, because they have in the past, Dak's salary is high, and so they're trying to clear cap space around this time of year. So they take a big chunk of his salary and they convert it into signing bonus, and then it spreads up to 5 years into the future. And so the Cowboys have done that, again, like I said, a few times. And so you've got cap, big void in his void year 2025, and in his void year in 2026. There's north of $30 million in cap money that the Cowboys could have had in past years account against their cap, but in terms of their definition of all in, they pushed it into the future because they were trying to get a Brandon Cooks. They were trying to get a Stephon Gilmore. Like, they were trying to build their team. And so they have all this money, tens of millions of dollars in the future. And if the Cowboys were to not get Dak Prescott done in terms of an extension before the March start of the 2025 league year, so about a year from now, if they weren't able to get a new deal by then all of the money in 25 and 26 would accelerate against the 2025 salary cap. And that is a huge chunk of change. And so that it could become bigger if the Cowboys ended up doing an acceleration of this year's $29 million salary, and they spread it across as few as 3 years. That would all accelerate if a no deal done is in 2025. So there's that. God, I forget where the question started because it's
No, it's great. It's fine.
Yeah, but once they're going to the rabbit hole, so there's just all of this there. So in terms of Dak's leverage, yeah, he's got leverage to get something done before that all happens. That trigger, I think, is more important about. It's less to me less about going into the final season of his contract. It's more about getting a deal done before that happens. And so, yeah, is that leverage? Of course, that is leverage. But where it becomes a dynamic landscape is that, in theory, it's not a negotiation where one team or one side of the talks is trying to get absolutely everything that he can from the club, and likewise, the club isn't just trying to get it. Like there should be both sides working together. Like, all right, we like you, we want you long term. Everyone knows Dak wants to be a Dallas Cowboy long term, so let's figure this out in a way that makes the most sense for our books, so that one, you can get paid, we're taking care of you, but also at the same time, this isn't going to hamstring your ability to have a supporting cast. This is going to hamstring your ability to have a championship caliber roster. And so that is, I think, kind of the spirit that maybe the Cowboys would want to see this at. And I think Dak, I want to speak for him, but I think he understands that at this stage of his career, especially if this isn't his second, this isn't his second contract in the league. He's been franchise tagged. He signed a big 4-year, $160 million contract. He's going to get handsomely rewarded this time around for the level his play has been. So it's okay. Well, let's go to the table. And let's work together and figure out what this looks like in terms of structure, what this looks like in terms of timing. Like I reported from the combine, there's some thought that it might make more sense to wait until 2025, just because it'll lower that cap hit in 2025 if you wait until then to do this deal. But there's also ways to structure it in 2024 where you can probably mitigate that some. So I'm not saying a deal can't get done this year. It certainly can, but it won't be the end of the world. And I think it's been framed, at least early in the offseason, it was framed that Dak's got all this leverage and the Cowboys got to get a deal done this year. And but really, it's not the case. I mean, you can do a simple conversion of his salary and spread it across 3 years. It's baked into his previous contract. You clear up to a little over $18 million in 2024 cap space by doing that alone. Or you could work with Dak Prescott, it's agent Todd France, and maybe they add a couple more void years. You can, that's something that they could do too. So it's really complex, and I think it's a little bit, again, nuanced to just simply saying that, yeah, Dak's got all the leverage in the world. Theoretically, he does have it if he wants to play it that way, but I think it's got to be a little bit more of all right, how can we collaborate on this and create something that makes sense? Because if Dak Prescott's going to be a Dallas Cowboy for the next 5-6 years, he probably doesn't want to quarterback a team that's limping along from against a salary cap and struggling to keep certain players that he values. He wants that locker room to be vibrant and talented, and just have this this not have been the last 12-win season that the Cowboys had. And so trying to have sustained success and an elongated window so they can consistently compete for what it is that they want to achieve. I think that's kind of the founding ground of where the conversations have to start, and from there you get to negotiations in terms of how can we all accomplish what it is that we want.
Because for me, when I hear that, it's interesting because if I'm Dak and I say, okay, let's just play it out this year, he would have really the first opportunity of his career to walk into unfettered free agency and then be able to allow the market to kind of dictate what they believe he's worth, and then be able to seek out something that he may feel like is more to his liking if that's something that he wants to do. And I'm sure if you're the Cowboys, yeah, you may have a plan, but I guess the plan doesn't look nearly as clear if Dak Prescott isn't there. Let's say if you do hang on to Trey Lance and you don't move him, how does this team then start to move forward? As you mentioned, wanting to keep this locker room as dynamic with the talent that they have, knowing that it may not have Tyler Biadasz, it may not have Tyron Smith, Tony Pollard may not be there. There's a lot of changes that are coming. How are they going to try and thread this needle, especially what they've got to take care of this offseason, even before we get to the NFL draft?
Well, the Cowboys don't have a whole lot of draft firepower. You'd expect that they would get 2 compensatory picks in April, day 3. That helps, but they, because of past trades, it's not like they're loaded with picks, and so that's an issue. So if they have an opportunity to maybe trade back, they feel at some point, day one, day two, maybe that is something that they look to do. But then I think it's this team, the front office, the coaching staff, everyone's hand is in this in terms of what it takes to take the next step as an organization, despite having the type of resources that I think we all associate with, increasing the talent of your team. It's going to be about player development. It's going to be about scheme. It's also going to be about, bringing the right guys into your building, but also, it's going to be the more the Malik Hooker type contracts, the Jaron Kearse type contracts. When those guys first got here, it's going to be less flash, more ripples than waves in free agency that can work. I mean, how many times have we seen a big name free agency, a high dollar free agency not be synonymous with success? I mean, those contracts can blow up and they can set you back. And I'm not making a defense to where the Cowboys are financially or any defense to the moves that they might not be making, but I've covered, this will be my 15th season covering the NFL, two other organizations, and I've seen, a Robert Meacham contract blow up in the Chargers' face, or a Jerry Gaither blow up in their face, or down the road of this, what's a reality in this league. So I think even though, look, the Cowboys need to hit on whoever it is they bring in. They can't afford to have a draft class like last year's in terms of such a little impact, immediate impact. But they maximize the resources you have, and find a way to get impactful players in your building, and use your scheme and use your development to once they're here, make it so that they're playing the best football that they can for you, and make you as a team better. But it's difficult to do, and I just don't think there's going to be a lot of sexy names that are about to come to Dallas. There could be some names that people no doubt recognize, and names that people can say, oh, I can see this. I can see how this one-year contract could pan out, and you kind of talk yourself into it. But there's some variance as to how this thing's going to go.
And one of those players I want to mention real quick, because he has been a long-standing player for this team. He's going into his 14th year, and it may not be with the Cowboys. Maybe there's still a way to figure it out. But I said this the other day when it came to Tyron Smith, that if he were to leave here, he would be yet another player in a long line of terrific Cowboys who were not able to win a championship with this franchise. And it just, for me, represents yet another disappointment with one of the best players that the franchise has really ever had. Where did things break down, and are there things that can still be salvaged in terms of Tyron Smith in Dallas to possibly bring him back for a 14th season with this team? Or is that pretty much sailed at this point, even before we get to free agency?
It was money. I mean, that's where things broke down, is a conversation as money, and how Tyron Smith would be compensated in Dallas if he was to return for a 14th season. They're way off in terms of, their last talks. They're way off about, I think Tyron Smith, plays a premier position, and he does it at an elite level, when healthy. And he's coming off a season in which he played 14 games. He's coming off a season in which a practice plan was found that made sense and worked for him. Correlated with the most time that we've seen him on the field for quite a few years now. And so, it's difficult to find tackles who look and play and are as experienced as Tyron Smith on the open market. I think the tackle market itself is pretty interesting, because just rewind to last year. The Cowboys were coming off of a season where Dalton Schultz played under the franchise tag. And as far as I know, they never even made him an offer before he became a free agent last year. And the market that Schultz found when he got to free agency was really, really depressed because of all of the tight ends that the league was excited about in that draft. And as time has shown, I think teams had reason to be excited for that draft class of tight ends. And, for Dalton Schultz, he took a real, I think it was a 1-year contract with the Houston Texans that was, well below what he believed and what the market previously would have said he was worth. And that's kind of what happens sometimes. There's a relation between what veterans get in the open market when the draft class is loaded, or when it's really shallow. It can really help a veteran, because teams are trying, all right, we got to address this position. What makes the most sense in terms of how we hit it? And so there's a lot of teams that are very comfortable with the draft class this year. Throughout since the Senior Bowl, and I would talk to scouts around the league, and they'd be like, quarterback, offensive tackle, offensive line. Those are the areas. Those are the sweet spots of this draft. And so now Tyron Smith is going to seems poised to go into free agency before a really, really deep tackle draft. Might that hurt him? Well, not the way I think it hurt Schultz, because of who Tyron Smith is when he's healthy, and because it's that tackle, and because there's such a lack of quality options around the league. Even with that deep draft, there's a lot of belief that Tyron Smith will be just okay in the open market. And if his market is as strong as a lot of people think, then I think that gap between where the Cowboys are financially and where some of these other suitors would be so far off that it wouldn't make much sense for the Cowboys to believe that Tyron Smith is going to be coming back. So I think that's more or less where things stand. And, I talked to one person who was pretty definitive about, where things stand and this gap not being able to be closed. And I talked to, others, okay, let's see, time will tell. We'll see. And so I think that's just kind of what we're all gonna have to do, is kind of wait. But the gap and the divide between the Cowboys and Tyron Smith is very real and may prove impossible to bridge.
Will that be the same thing with like Tyler Biadasz, Tony Pollard? Like, okay, if it makes sense, we'll bring you guys back. If it doesn't, then, maybe we'll need to see you play and finish or play somewhere else in 2024 and beyond.
I think they're both different cases. I think Biadasz, I personally, I really like Tyler Biadasz as a man. It's difficult not to respect the way he goes about his business. He's a guy who constantly is watching film. I mean, you're in there in the locker room, Kevin. I mean, it's a lot of guys are doing a lot of things when the media's in there for 45 minutes every day. I mean, I probably have seen dozens of times Tyler Biadasz pouring over his tablet, looking at film from the practice that just ended, or looking at previous opponent. Like he's wired that way. And you look at some of the plays that he made this past season, where he's, just the action's 20 yards downfield, and Biadasz is sprinting downfield just in case there's a fumble, and then there is a fumble. I think multiple occasions this season he fell on it, and so he's just kind of the as a center, he's got some glue elements to who he is as a person, who he is as a player. Super tough, hasn't missed a lot of time. That said, Cowboys feel that way too about him, but I don't think that's enough to move the needle in terms of they feel so many places where they can spend dollars, and you're talking about not being able to pay enough to even be really in the conversation today on Tyron Smith. I think with Tyler, I don't know if the Cowboys think it's realistic that they'll be able to pull that off. So it would be the third straight year. Say about this what you will, but it's notable. Third straight year where the Cowboys had an interior offensive lineman that they drafted, they developed, saw him become a starter, and did not re-sign him. Connor Williams, who before that ACL tear was pretty phenomenal in Miami, switched him to center. He did at a really high level. And Connor McGovern there in Buffalo, who I believe started every game this past season. He had a contract redone. So Tyler Biadasz will be the next in line. And, just like with those other two, Cowboys will get a compensatory pick for it, and on they go. But it's that to me is where things stand. And you got Brock Hoffman in the building. You got TJ Bass in the building. Bass has just been a guard. He never played center in his life until during practice. I believe it was in September after he made the 53-man roster. Mike Solari started working with him, after practice on, taking some snaps. And did it come just like that, like second nature? No, it's a process. And so I don't know where he's going to be at center come OTAs. He might not be really realistically in the fold. We'll see how it takes. I'm pretty sure he's working on that now. But we'll see if the Cowboys 2024 center is already in the building, or it's something that they find a way to add at some point over the weeks ahead.
A lot for this team to still figure out. And before we get out of here today, I can't not have this conversation with you and not look at Mike McCarthy and Mike Zimmer. Mike McCarthy in the final year of his 5-year contract. Mike Zimmer, as you have reported, 1-year deal to be the defensive coordinator here in Dallas, and the pressure that comes with this 2024 season, regardless of who is or who isn't on this roster. How much pressure is on this group to find a way to get this done? And are we possibly looking at a complete, or whatever that may look like in the Joneses' eyes, a overhaul of what this organization looks like, not just from a personnel standpoint, regardless if CeeDee Lamb and Micah get their deals. Are we looking at a possible overhaul of this team if Mike McCarthy can't get this done in 2024?
I mean, if the Cowboys fall off and they fail to get to the second round of the playoffs, or they fail to reach the postseason, when the standard is what it is, and Mike McCarthy has helped maintain or even lift that standard during his time here, it's the question is, can Jerry Jones extend those contracts if they fall so short in 2024? I don't know. I mean, it's hard to sell that to people, and I don't know about you, Kevin, but I've covered, like I said, I covered the Chargers for 7 years until through their relocation to another city, to Los Angeles. And I know San Diego and Los Angeles might seem like it's all in Southern California, but not to people who live in San Diego. I was there when people were burning. There was a pile of bonfire of, Phil Rivers jerseys and Dan Fouts jerseys and photos and just bobbleheads and all of that, and newspaper clippings for when they went to the Super Bowl in '94 season, and they lost to the San Francisco 49ers. All of that was just in a pile in front of the team facility. Someone threw eggs on the glass doors in front of the building. So I've been through that. I covered the Raiders, after they were approved for relocation and the process of them moving to Las Vegas. So I've seen fans be disenchanted, and really the Raiders don't even qualify because Raider fans are wired differently. Wherever the team goes, we go. But for the Chargers, it was ugly. And I don't know if on social media I have seen a fan base as jaded or beat up as this one today in Dallas. It's done something. Not just last year, the number 2 seed and the first round loss, but it's the collection of it's really a whole generation of Cowboys fans who haven't been able to get experience what the previous generation has. And that disappointment is palpable. And so if the Cowboys were to fall short again, I don't see how Mike McCarthy gets re-upped. I don't know, because I don't know how Jerry, the ultimate salesperson, can sell that to this fan base at this time. And so is there more
He had
pressure?
a hard time convincing them this time around,
which I think is why the temperature is what it is. So is it going to be? I have a hard time seeing how today. You never know what happens. You never know how they go about it. I mean, they could whatever. But you have a hard time imagining Jerry being able to feel like he can sell this to people. A season that falls well short, and being able to sign extensions. That's hard to fathom. So. Yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure on this season. I do think there's something to be said for a staff that predominantly, all their top people from a coaching standpoint are in their final year. I think there's something to be said for that. So, in 2025 being this bear of a salary cap year, what does 2025 look like? Is it a new coaching staff? Does that coaching staff get a bit of a leash? Did they just say, all right, let's just gonna, take our medicine in 2025 and get financially to a place where we can kind of really get after the scene again in 2026. I mean, we're future casting way down the line, but it's kind of a 2-year conversation right now with this team. As much as we want to discuss all in and this and that, this is a 2-year window where the Cowboys stand a year from now is a fascinating thing. And the Cowboys are planning for, surviving this little spell of just salary cap hell that they're entering. So all in, I still don't know what that means, Kevin.
And you made the point, this is about as disillusioned the fan base has been in quite some time, even with the 2 previous, disappointments in the playoffs this year, with all the things that have been built toward making a run this year and not being able to do so. This fan base, I have not seen the fan base as angry, as disappointed, and really almost as frustrated as they've ever been based off of what didn't happen this year. And I'll ask you this last question, because as someone who is there in the locker room, talking to players, talking to coaches and the individuals, not just within the organization, but also around the league, one of the other buzzwords we talked about, the all-in phrase, another word that's always talked about around this team, and you could probably guess it too, is the word culture. Is there a cultural, quote-unquote, problem with this team? And if so, what does that mean? And if not, what is it that you feel like continues to hold this team back from ultimately getting to what they believe what is a championship that they believe they should have at this point.
Yeah, culture is another one of those loaded terms. I mean, if you're to meet Zach Martin, meet Tyron Smith, talk to those guys, talk to Dak, talk to Tony Pollard, talk to Tyler Biadasz, talk to Tyler Smith, talk to all these different players within the building, within the locker room, and see the leadership, and I think just the locker room overall. I would say there's no way you can walk away from those conversations and feel like culture is an issue, but it's not just those guys, and there's a whole variety of personalities and that, but. I mean, overall, it's actually, I think to me, I think a lot of people feel is a really strong locker room in terms of the people there, the blend of, older and young guys. I mean, you look at wide receiver, when a guy like Brandon Cooks comes in, or in the DB room, the way that Stephon Gilmore comes in, the impact those guys have. I mean, we looked at the jump that Jalen Tolbert made from year 1 to year 2. It's because you have a veteran like Brandon Cooks who can just, a young guy can lean on and trust. And so there's a lot of positives to how the locker room is built. That said, do some guys have room for maturation? Some young guys? Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no question about that. There's no question. And those guys need to look in the mirror. Those guys need to find a way to, make sure that they're bringing up others with them in terms of, don't just be focused on you. Don't be super, in the moment and your production and all that. Just how am I going to elevate the game of those around me and all that? And so there is some of that. And so I wouldn't to say that Cowboys have a culture problem. I think it's probably a step too far, but there are certain elements of different guys who can do more. And this is probably, I think, throw a rock and you can hit any NFL building when you talk about this. But yeah, they're just like there is in other places. There's some guys in the building who can do more. And so that's a fact. But it should be blown out of proportion. No, I don't think so either, because that's not fair to so much of what's positive in the building, but it can be better. And I think there's hope with, just another year of this coaching staff together. You got some new voices, and Mike Zimmer, who's I think he'd tell you he's a bit of a hard ass in terms of how he gets after guys.
Mm-hmm.
There's some belief that, if you want to call it culture, whatever you want to call it, but guys are going to be coached a little differently. Guys are going to be held to account a little bit differently. There's going to be different style, different voice. And honestly, Dan Quinn's phenomenal. And so I think it's everyone who might talk about this thing feels like they have to follow by saying, like, that's not to say Dan Quinn didn't do a lot of like incredible things and like all that. But something's going to happen with change. And the Cowboys hope that, while they would have loved Dan Quinn to have returned for a 4th season, they believe like, all right, this is a situation. This is what we have. There had to be a change. And with this change, maybe this voice could help us guide our young players in a really productive way.
Yeah, trying to separate the men in the locker room versus everything else that comes with being a Dallas Cowboy. I feel like the lines get blurred so much that when people look at the organization as a whole, they look at the players within the locker room, the team itself, and then they marry that with the Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones, the Jones family experience and what that means to be a Cowboy, and they say, oh, it's a cultural problem. No, I think the men in the room understand what they need to do, but balancing all of those other things that being with the Dallas Cowboy comes with, part of that, I think, is what people maybe get confused at times with.
Yeah, I think it was a couple years ago. It was either 2022 or 2021. Before the season, the Cowboys had like a blue collar or probably a blue, it was called like red carpet. So the blue carpet event at the Star, and I think NFL Network filmed it, and it was ridiculous. Like, these guys haven't done anything to like get this sort of like celebrity treatment, and like, it's cool, I guess, to have your wife friend or your girlfriend, whatever, like taking photos and this whole thing. But like, isn't this a football team still at the end of the day? And like, I do think there at times is a bit of a clash between like this, the Dallas Cowboys, the brand, approaching on $10 billion entity in terms of valuation and all of that, and the Star and America's team. I mean, it all seems a little bit dated, but still, it's part of the identity, I think, of the brand. And there's all that, but there's also a team that's got to, just like every other, lace up for 17 weeks of the regular season and go and win and show toughness and show grit and be able to go on the road and go and be able to, when the stakes are highest, perform at your best. And this team hasn't done that, and so I think people are rightfully making the connection between the two and saying, okay, well, is there too much of the business side and not enough of just focusing on going ones versus ones in practice and just clashing and just being better and all that. But I think Mike McCarthy has done as well of a job as anyone could at balancing it and trying to take care of players and get them locked in and all that. So it's a fascinating building. It's a fascinating place in terms of just it being the Dallas Cowboys. But honestly, if you're to talk to scouts and you talk to coaches and you talk to a lot of players, it feels just like any other building because they are separate from all that stuff. But that stuff still is there in the background, and it shouldn't encroach on the football side of thing. I think so often it doesn't. But I just thought of that blue carpet event as kind of a example of like, yeah, it's so Dallas Cowboys.
That's a perfect way to leave it right there. That's a perfect way to leave it. Michael, tell the folks where they can find you, what you got going on, man.
Sure. I Dallas Morning News. We have a website. It's there's a paywall, and I cannot control the paywall. I can only control if the paywall's worth it. And so that's where my content is. I'm on the X, Gehlken NFL. So there's that as well. But we do have a website, and a lot of stuff is good there. So highly recommended.
Well, Michael, you do a terrific job covering this team. You look for folks who are on the outside looking in, and look, there's enough Cowboys covers as it is everywhere. But for you specifically, you have become one of those folks that look when something's going on with the Cowboys. Hey, what's Michael talking about? What's Michael saying about the Cowboys? What's going on here? So they're looking to you for a lot of this stuff. So we appreciate what you do and how hard you cover this team because, as you've mentioned, you've been doing this for a long time, and I'm sure there is no more unique franchise to cover than what is with the Dallas Cowboys. So I appreciate you hanging out with me here on the Gray Area Podcast for a little bit today.
My pleasure, Kevin. Thanks for having me. I know I didn't get to Pollard earlier. Cowboys want him back. We'll see what the price tag is, but I wouldn't be surprised if that happens.
Well, the way the running back market is looking right now, oh boy, it's going to be tough sledding for these running backs out here. Saquon not even getting tagged by the Giants, so there's going to be a lot of running backs that are going to be available, Derrick Henry, out there on the open market, so we'll see what happens with some of those guys there. That is it for this episode of the Gray Area Podcast. Again, thank you to Michael Gehlken of the Dallas Morning News covering the Dallas Cowboys for joining me on this episode today. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. And you can also like and comment on this video as well on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports. And make sure you follow Michael on Twitter at Gehlken NFL. I'll be back on Friday with my man Reg Adatula for Reg's Fridays here on the Gray Area Podcast as we talk a little NBA, NFL, get you ready for a big weekend in sports as well. Until Friday, my name is Kevin Gray, and I'll talk to you later. Peace.